On June 19, 1944, a Japanese transport aircraft touched down on the rough volcanic surface of Chidori Airfield on the island of Iwo Jima. As Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi stepped onto the runway, he was immediately struck by the suffocating heat radiating from the black ash beneath his feet. At 52 years of age, Kuribayashi was a seasoned officer with decades of service behind him. In his possession were direct orders bearing the personal authorization of Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. The 8-square-mile island was to be defended to total annihilation. Surveying the bleak terrain, Mount Suribachi rising ominously in the south and jagged volcanic sands stretching endlessly in every direction, Kuribayashi grasped the true meaning of his assignment. According to later recollections by his wife Yoshie, he had already accepted his fate. When informed of his orders, he reportedly told her that it was doubtful even his remains would ever be returned from Iwo Jima. Strategically, the island held immense importance. Located roughly 750 miles south of Tokyo, Iwo Jima lay directly between newly seized American positions in the Mariana Islands and the Japanese home islands. Its airfields enabled Japanese fighter planes to intercept US B-29 Superfortress bombers en route to strike Japan's cities. If the island were lost, Japan would forfeit its early warning system, while the United States would gain emergency landing strips for damaged bombers and forward bases for P-51 Mustang fighters, allowing continuous escort missions all the way to Tokyo. What Kuribayashi and the approximately 21,000 troops who would soon occupy the island could not foresee was that their defense would culminate in the deadliest battle ever fought by the United States Marine Corps. The struggle would last 36 days, exposing both the hopelessness of Japan's strategic situation and the extraordinary endurance of soldiers ordered to sacrifice their lives for a cause already beyond recovery. Commanding Iwo Jima was both a prestigious honor and a near-certain death sentence. Just weeks earlier, on June 8, 1944, Kuribayashi had been granted the rare distinction of a private audience with Emperor Hirohito prior to his departure. Yet some historians, including Kumio Kakuhashi, have suggested that Kuribayashi's appointment may not have been coincidental. By mid-1944, Japanese military leadership understood that holding the island would be virtually impossible. Kuribayashi, known for his independence of thought, may have been chosen precisely because he had fallen out of favor with influential ultranationalist factions. Earlier in his career, Kuribayashi had served as deputy military attaché in the United States between 1928 and 1930. During that period, he traveled extensively across the country, studied at Harvard University, and observed American industrial power firsthand. These experiences shaped his worldview in ways that alarmed Japan's hardline officers. In a letter to his wife, he once warned that the United States was the last nation Japan should ever confront, citing its vast manufacturing capacity and the adaptability of its people. At a time when Japanese military doctrine placed faith in spiritual resolve over material strength, such assessments branded Kuribayashi as dangerously pessimistic. Despite his private doubts about the war's outcome, Kuribayashi approached his mission with discipline and innovation. Upon inspecting Iwo Jima's existing defenses, he quickly concluded that conventional Japanese tactics would lead only to rapid destruction. The island's garrison had been preparing shallow beach fortifications, adhering to long-standing doctrine, confront the enemy at the shoreline, repel the landing, and perish honorably if necessary. Kuribayashi halted this approach immediately. He had closely studied earlier American amphibious assaults, including the Battle of Tarawa, where coastal defenses were obliterated by naval bombardment before U.S. forces even reached the shore. He had also examined the catastrophic outcomes of mass banzai charges at Saipan, which expended thousands of lives without altering the inevitable American advance. Iwo Jima, he determined, would not follow that pattern. Kuribayashi introduced a fundamentally different defensive philosophy, one rooted in depth, concealment, and endurance. Instead of contesting the beaches, he ordered the construction of an extensive underground network of tunnels, bunkers, and fortified positions designed to withstand prolonged bombardment. His strategy was to allow American forces to land unopposed, advance inland, and then face sustained, lethal resistance from positions impervious to air and naval fire. This approach aimed not at victory, which Kuribayashi knew was unattainable, but at exacting the highest possible cost. By transforming the island into a fortress beneath the surface, he sought to delay the enemy, maximize casualties, and demonstrate resistance to the very end, reshaping the Battle of Iwo Jima into a grim testament to determination, sacrifice, and the tragic limits of military strategy. The commanding general directed his engineering corps to undertake an ambitious and unprecedented task: the creation of a vast underground defensive complex carved directly into the island's volcanic terrain. Natural caves were expanded and interconnected, while solid basalt and ash were transformed into fortified corridors and chambers. To accomplish this, roughly 1/4 of the entire garrison was reassigned from combat preparation to excavation duties. This enormous diversion of manpower immediately sparked objections from junior officers, many of whom argued that soldiers should be drilling for battle rather than laboring underground with picks and shovels. The general, however, remained unmoved. According to recollections from his former chief of staff, he frequently reminded his officers that the industrial and logistical strength of the United States far exceeded Japan's capacity to comprehend. In his view, Japan had deliberately entered a conflict against a vastly superior opponent and could only survive by preparing for the worst possible scenario. Over the following months, the island was transformed into one of the most advanced defensive systems constructed during the Pacific War. Specialized mining engineers were brought from the Japanese mainland to design an intricate subterranean network. Their plans called for tunnel systems built at multiple depths, allowing airflow to circulate while reducing the impact of bomb blasts near tunnel entrances. The underground layout was intended not only for protection, but also for sustained resistance under constant bombardment. By February 1945, Japanese engineers had completed nearly 18 kilometers of tunnels, linking bunkers, artillery positions, command posts, and supply areas across the island. Life beneath the surface was brutal. Soldiers assigned to tunnel construction endured temperatures between 30 and 50 degrees Celsius as heat radiated relentlessly from the surrounding volcanic rock. The confined spaces became suffocating furnaces, and heat exhaustion was a daily occurrence. Clean drinking water was critically limited, dependent entirely on shipments delivered by submarines or surface vessels that had to evade relentless American naval patrols. Mount Suribachi alone concealed several thousand meters of tunnel passages beneath its northern slopes. Farther inland, the primary command headquarters was positioned deep underground in the northern highlands near the village of Ka. Located approximately 20 meters below the surface, this command bunker consisted of numerous reinforced chambers connected by about 150 meters of corridors. It was here that General Kuribayashi established his operations center and coordinated the island's defense. The defending force on Iwo Jima reflected the strained condition of Japan's military in the final phase of the war. At its core was the 109th Division, numbering roughly 13,000 army personnel organized into two independent mixed brigades. One of these formations, commanded by Major General Koto Osuga, consisted of approximately 5,000 soldiers. The 145th Infantry Regiment, led by Colonel Masuo Iizuka, contributed an additional 2,700 men. Supporting them were around 7,500 naval personnel from the 27th Air Flotilla under the command of Rear Admiral Toshinosuke Ichimaru. Unlike earlier Japanese units hardened by prolonged combat in China or the early Pacific campaigns, many of Iwo Jima's defenders were recent conscripts with limited training. Others were middle-aged reservists recalled to service as Japan's manpower reserves dwindled. Administrative staff and support personnel were increasingly reassigned to frontline roles as the empire's strategic situation continued to deteriorate. One of the most prominent figures among the defenders was Colonel Baron Takeichi Nishi, commander of the 26th Tank Regiment. Born into an aristocratic family on July 12, 1902, Nishi was internationally famous long before the war. He had won a gold medal in equestrian show jumping at the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics, gaining celebrity status in the United States and forming friendships with Hollywood icons such as Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford. According to later accounts from his widow, Nishi was deeply troubled after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He reportedly understood that war with the United States was strategically disastrous, yet felt compelled by loyalty and duty to serve. On July 18, 1944, while traveling from Busan in Korea to Iwo Jima, the transport ship carrying his regiment was struck by torpedoes from the American submarine USS Cobia. All 28 tanks assigned to the unit were lost to the depths of the Pacific. Nishi returned to Tokyo to request replacements and managed to secure 22 tanks. During this brief return home, he paid a final visit to his beloved horse, Uranus, the same mount that had carried him to Olympic victory. Throughout late 1944, defensive construction continued at a feverish pace despite constant air raids and naval harassment by American forces. Japanese engineers discovered that the island's fine black volcanic ash, when combined with cement, produced exceptionally durable concrete. Using this mixture, they constructed pillboxes with reinforced walls up to 4 feet thick, capable of surviving direct hits from naval gunfire. By the time the defenses were completed, the island bristled with weaponry. Approximately 300 anti-aircraft guns, 33 naval guns ranging from 4.7 to 6 inches, 438 artillery pieces, 69 anti-tank guns, and Nishi's 22 tanks. The tanks were buried up to their turrets and repurposed as stationary armored gun emplacements. Gasoline-powered generators supplied electricity for lighting and radio communications deep underground, while hundreds of concealed artillery and mortar positions were carefully integrated into the landscape. The result was a defensive system that turned every section of Iwo Jima into a lethal trap. Any advancing force would be exposed to overlapping fire from multiple hidden positions. Central to this approach was Kuribayashi's radical departure from traditional Japanese doctrine. He categorically prohibited banzai charges, mass frontal assaults that had defined earlier Japanese defenses, and emphasized symbolic sacrifice over tactical effectiveness. Kuribayashi viewed such attacks as meaningless slaughter. Charging into concentrated American firepower, he argued, achieved nothing beyond waste. Instead, each soldier on the island was ordered to inflict maximum casualties, with the explicit expectation that every defender should kill at least 10 American troops before falling. Victory was not the objective. Survival was impossible. The goal was attrition, bleeding the enemy at the highest possible cost. This philosophy provoked fierce opposition within the Japanese command structure. Senior officers, including Vice Admiral Sadayoshi Matsunaga, openly challenged Kuribayashi's methods, leading to deep internal divisions over how the battle should be fought. Yet, despite the controversy, Kuribayashi remained steadfast, convinced that only relentless, calculated resistance could fulfill Japan's final defensive duty on Iwo Jima. Determined to resist the American invasion as close to the shoreline as possible, Japanese commanders initially focused on fortifying the beaches and confronting the landing forces head-on. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, however, rejected this approach. Viewing it as strategically flawed, he removed Lieutenant General Matsunaga from his post and appointed Rear Admiral Toshinosuke Ichimaru in his place. Unlike his predecessor, Ichimaru demonstrated a greater willingness to align naval assets with the Army's defensive doctrine, allowing for a more unified and deliberate plan. By December 1944, Kuribayashi set February 11, 1945 as the deadline for completing all defensive preparations on the island. Despite persistent harassment from American submarines and aircraft, Japanese reinforcements continued to arrive through January. By the time the invasion approached, the island's garrison numbered between 21,000 and 23,000 troops, yet manpower alone masked a grim reality: supplies were dangerously insufficient. Ammunition stockpiles amounted to only about 60% of what military doctrine deemed necessary for even a single division-level battle. Food reserves were calculated to sustain the defenders for no more than 4 months under ideal conditions. Fresh water, however, was critically limited from the outset. Compounding these shortages, roughly 1,500 Japanese soldiers never reached the island at all, lost when American submarines intercepted and sank their transport vessels en route. Daily life on Iwo Jima prior to the invasion was marked by exhaustion, deprivation, and mounting psychological strain. Soldiers labored constantly, carving tunnels and fortifications into the volcanic rock. Most lived underground, sleeping on bare stone while inhaling air heavy with sulfur fumes. The island's very name reflected its volcanic nature, as toxic gases seeped through the terrain and into every shelter. There were no trees, no meaningful vegetation beyond sparse scrub. The heat was unrelenting, and the black volcanic sand absorbed and radiated it mercilessly. As conditions worsened, disease spread rapidly. Heat rashes, dysentery, and various tropical illnesses became commonplace. Medical supplies were scarce, and malnutrition weakened already exhausted bodies. Unsanitary living conditions took a severe toll, and many soldiers succumbed to illness long before encountering American forces. Throughout this hardship, Kuribayashi made a deliberate point of sharing the suffering of his men. He refused special treatment, privileges, or exemptions. Accounts from former subordinates describe behavior that was highly unusual for an officer of his rank. Kuribayashi frequently visited wounded enlisted men in field hospitals, an act virtually unheard of among senior general staff officers. When water rations were reduced due to shortages, he accepted the same meager allotment as the lowest-ranking private. Personal letters written by Kuribayashi during this period reveal a reflective and deeply human figure. He expressed profound affection for his family, anxiety over their uncertain future, and a calm acceptance of his own likely death. In a letter to his wife Yoshi, written in November 1944, he made his expectations unmistakably clear. He urged her not to anticipate his return, acknowledging that once the Americans landed, the defenders of the island would share the fate of those previously destroyed at Attu and Saipan. He wrote that his officers and soldiers were fully aware of what awaited them. Kuribayashi apologized for dying in battle against the United States, but explained that his purpose was to defend the island for as long as possible in order to delay air attacks against Tokyo. He urged his wife to protect her health and to care for their children, knowing that their future would be difficult in a defeated nation. These words left no doubt that he harbored no illusions, neither about his survival nor about the ultimate outcome of the battle. Beginning on June 15, 1944, American Air Forces initiated an extended bombing campaign against the island. For 74 consecutive days, the longest sustained pre-invasion aerial bombardment of the Pacific War B-24 and B-25 bombers struck Iwo Jima. Airfields were cratered and surface structures were reduced to rubble, yet the campaign proved far less effective than planners believed. The vast majority of Japanese defenses lay hidden beneath the ground, protected by an extensive tunnel network that absorbed the punishment with minimal loss of combat capability. American intelligence assessments failed to grasp the true scale of the island's defenses. Aerial reconnaissance photographs showed shattered runways and ruined buildings, leading analysts to conclude that the bombardment had largely neutralized Japanese resistance. Estimates placed the garrison strength at approximately 13,000 to 15,000 men, significantly below the actual number. More critically, reconnaissance imagery could not penetrate the volcanic rock to reveal the underground fortifications that formed the backbone of Kuribayashi's defense strategy. On February 16, 1945, the final phase of the assault began. As dawn approached, the sea surrounding Iwo Jima erupted in fire. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers commenced a massive naval bombardment, unleashing overwhelming firepower in preparation for the amphibious landing that would soon follow. Major General Harry Schmidt of the United States Marine Corps had initially asked for a sustained naval and aerial bombardment lasting 10 full days before any landing attempt. What he ultimately received was less than a third of that request, just 3 days of shelling, further weakened by poor weather that reduced visibility and accuracy. Deep beneath the island's surface, Japanese troops remained hidden inside an extensive network of tunnels, enduring the bombardment and conserving their strength while they waited for the invasion they knew was coming. On February 17, a group of 12 landing craft infantry (LCI) gunboats moved dangerously close to the shoreline to provide fire support for underwater demolition teams clearing obstacles. At that moment, Japanese forces suddenly emerged from concealed positions and unleashed a coordinated barrage. Every available weapon was brought to bear. The result was catastrophic for the Americans. LCI 449 was sunk outright, several others were badly crippled, and the engagement left roughly 170 sailors dead or wounded. Yet this costly encounter exposed numerous previously hidden Japanese gun positions. Armed with this new intelligence, the battleships Tennessee and Idaho advanced to within 2,500 yards of the island on February 18 and began striking identified targets with precise and overwhelming firepower. For the Japanese defenders sheltering underground, the experience of this bombardment was relentless and psychologically exhausting. Each shell impact sent violent tremors through the rock, making the mountain feel as though it were coming apart. Fine dust and chunks of debris rained continuously from tunnel ceilings. Some soldiers whispered prayers, others sat wordlessly in the darkness, and many wrote farewell messages to loved ones they believed they would never see again. In total, American naval forces fired approximately 22,000 shells at Iwo Jima during the pre-landing bombardment. Every explosion was a stark demonstration of the industrial capacity arrayed against the island's defenders. Despite this, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi's defensive doctrine proved remarkably effective. The vast majority of Japanese positions protected underground remained operational. At precisely 8:59 a.m. on February 19, 1945, the invasion began. Marines from the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions surged toward the shore in the first assault waves. Amphibious tractors filled the horizon, advancing in seemingly endless succession. Beyond them, the support fleet stretched as far as the eye could see, hundreds of ships forming a display of naval strength unlike anything the Japanese garrison had ever witnessed. As landing craft reached the beaches, they encountered heavy surf and steep embankments. Marines dismounted and immediately found themselves sinking ankle-deep into loose volcanic ash. Movement inland was slow and exhausting. Vehicles struggled for traction, many bogging down completely in the soft terrain. Throughout this early phase, Kuribayashi's instructions were being followed to the letter: allow the enemy to land unopposed. Let them crowd the shoreline. For nearly half an hour, American troops advanced with minimal resistance, unsure of what lay ahead. Then the order was given. In a single, devastating moment, Japanese artillery, mortars, and machine guns opened fire simultaneously. The beach was transformed into a lethal trap. With no natural cover, Marines threw themselves flat against the sand as shells and bullets tore through the packed landing zones. Japanese guns, pre-sighted on every section of the shoreline, struck with terrifying precision. By nightfall, close to 30,000 Marines had made it ashore, securing a beachhead across the southern portion of the island. Mount Suribachi had been effectively isolated from the rest of the Japanese defensive network. The price, however, was staggering. More than 500 Marines were killed and over 1,800 wounded on the first day alone. That evening, veterans braced themselves for the kind of mass nighttime banzai assaults seen elsewhere in the Pacific. None came. Kuribayashi had explicitly forbidden such attacks. Instead, only small probing actions occurred, leaving the Marines uneasy but relieved. The direct assault on Mount Suribachi began on February 20. The 28th Marine Regiment initiated a slow and punishing advance against deeply entrenched positions. Progress was measured in yards. Flamethrowers were used to incinerate bunker interiors, demolition charges sealed tunnel entrances, and grenades were hurled into pillboxes. Japanese defenders fought from carefully prepared strongpoints, withdrawing through underground passages when necessary and reappearing from unexpected directions to continue the fight. The defense of the mountain was led by Colonel Kanehiko Atsuchi, who commanded approximately 1,800 troops. Under his direction, resistance remained disciplined and determined. After 3 days of non-stop combat, on February 23, a Marine patrol finally reached the summit. At 10:20 a.m., they planted a small American flag, prompting cheers from troops across the beachhead below. Later that same day, a larger flag was brought up to replace it. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the moment of the second, raising an image that would become one of the most enduring symbols of the Second World War. Yet for the Japanese soldiers still alive beneath the mountain, the flag overhead did not signal defeat. The battle for them continued underground. Even after Mount Suribachi was officially declared secure, pockets of Japanese soldiers continued to resist deep beneath the ground. Within the labyrinth of tunnels carved into the volcano, isolated groups fought on for weeks, unseen and unreachable, long after the surface battle there had ended. The true heart of Japan's defense, however, was never Suribachi. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had concentrated his forces in the northern half of Iwo Jima, deliberately choosing terrain that gave every advantage to the defender. This region was a nightmare of fractured volcanic rock, narrow ravines, jagged ridgelines, and an almost endless network of caves. Over months of preparation, these natural features had been transformed into a meticulously engineered defensive system, an interlocking web of positions designed to trap and destroy any attacker who entered it. To the Marines who fought there, the landscape quickly became synonymous with terror. They assigned grim nicknames to the strongest enemy positions: the Meat Grinder, Turkey Knob, Hill 382, the Amphitheater, Bloody Gorge. Each name marked not a single bunker, but a dense cluster of fortified caves, pillboxes, and gun positions that could not be bypassed. Everyone had to be taken by direct assault. 3 Marine divisions, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, advanced simultaneously into this killing ground. Progress was measured in yards, sometimes in mere feet. Resistance was relentless and uncompromising. What American forces encountered in northern Iwo Jima was the full realization of Kuribayashi's defensive doctrine. Positions that appeared obliterated by artillery or airstrikes would erupt back to life hours later. Japanese defenders emerged from hidden tunnel entrances, reoccupying bunkers that Marines believed had already been cleared. The underground network allowed troops to move unseen, reinforce threatened sectors, and strike from unexpected directions. In response, the Marines were forced to invent and refine new methods of underground combat. Flamethrower teams were used to burn through connected cave chambers, while demolition crews employed explosives to seal tunnel entrances or collapse entire sections. These tactics were brutally effective but came at an extraordinary cost. Flamethrower operators suffered casualty rates approaching 90%, making it one of the most dangerous roles on the battlefield. Armored units were drawn deeply into this struggle. Marine tank battalions found their M4A3 R3 flame tanks in constant demand, operating at close range against fortified cave mouths. By the final phase of the battle, the 5th Marine Division alone was consuming between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of napalm every single day. As February gave way to March, conditions inside the Japanese defenses deteriorated rapidly. Losses mounted without pause, food stocks were reduced to starvation levels, water became so scarce that soldiers suffered extreme dehydration even as they continued to fight. Medical supplies were exhausted entirely, leaving the wounded to endure their injuries without anesthetics or even basic treatment. Ammunition shortages began to affect certain weapons, yet resistance did not collapse. Kuribayashi's strategy, inflicting maximum casualties for every yard of ground, was succeeding. American losses had already surpassed all pre-invasion projections. What had been expected to last only a few days had stretched into a third brutal week with no clear end in sight. Baron Takeichi Nishi's tank regiment, its vehicles destroyed or immobilized, continued the fight on foot, holding prepared defensive positions in the northern highlands. American intelligence officers were aware that Nishi was still alive somewhere on the island. Loudspeaker broadcasts urged him to surrender, emphasizing his international fame and suggesting that the world would mourn his loss. No reply ever came. Nishi remained with his men, sharing their hunger and exhaustion, enforcing discipline and sustaining morale even as defeat became inevitable. Around March 22, 1945, Nishi was killed in action. The precise circumstances were never established. His remains were never conclusively identified among the thousands of Japanese dead scattered across the northern plateau. Some accounts claim he took his own life according to ritual tradition. Others maintain he fell while leading his troops in combat. After the battle, he was posthumously promoted to the rank of colonel and awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, 3rd class, gold rays with neck ribbon. By mid-March, American advances had compressed the surviving Japanese forces into a final pocket measuring less than 1 square mile at the island's northern tip. Remarkably, Kuribayashi's command system continued to function. Orders and reports still moved through the tunnel network, maintaining cohesion even in the final stages. On March 17, Kuribayashi transmitted his last message to Imperial headquarters in Tokyo. He acknowledged that the battle was nearing its conclusion. He reported that only about 400 men remained under his command, that American tanks had penetrated the final defensive line, and that the last stronghold was under direct attack. Despite this, he declared that his forces would continue fighting. He expressed regret that the island could not be held, but emphasized that resistance had not yet ceased. An earlier message sent on March 16 carried an even heavier emotional weight. Kuribayashi spoke of his sorrow as he imagined the suffering that awaited the Japanese homeland. Yet he found a measure of solace in the resolve of his officers and soldiers who faced death without hesitation after waging a desperate inch-by-inch struggle against an overwhelmingly powerful enemy under bombardments beyond description. By late March 1945, the United States officially announced that Iwo Jima had been secured. The declaration came on March 26, exactly 36 days after American forces first stormed the island's black volcanic beaches. Yet this announcement marked a political milestone more than a true end to the fighting. Long after the island was declared safe, combat continued in the shadows beneath its surface. Deep underground, Japanese soldiers remained hidden inside an intricate network of fortified tunnels and sealed caves. These defenders refused to surrender. Under the cover of darkness, small groups emerged to search for scraps of food and precious water, then disappeared again into the earth. To eliminate this resistance, American troops resorted to brutal and methodical tactics. Tunnel entrances were collapsed with explosives, seawater was forced into underground chambers, and flamethrowers and grenades were used to clear positions carved deep into the rock. The final organized Japanese resistance is believed to have ended on March 26, the same day the island was declared secured. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the architect of Japan's innovative defensive strategy on Iwo Jima, is thought to have been killed during a last desperate assault on American positions. One day earlier, on March 25, approximately 300 of his remaining soldiers launched a final banzai attack, a move that directly contradicted Kuribayashi's own doctrine, which had emphasized attrition over suicidal charges. His body was never recovered or positively identified. Rear Admiral Ichimaru also lost his life during this closing phase of the battle. When the casualty figures were tallied, the scale of the battle stunned both nations. American forces suffered 26,038 total casualties, including roughly 6,821 deaths. The Marine Corps alone recorded 5,931 killed in action, dead of wounds, or missing and presumed dead, a number greater than all Marine deaths in World War I combined. In addition, 209 Navy corpsmen and surgeons attached to Marine units were killed, and approximately 19,217 Marines were wounded. Iwo Jima stands out as the only major battle in the Pacific War where American casualties exceeded those of the Japanese, although Japanese fatalities still vastly outnumbered American deaths. For Japan, the outcome was devastating. Of roughly 21,000 defenders, only 1,083 survived. Just 216 Japanese soldiers were captured during the fighting itself. The rest emerged weeks or even months later from tunnels and caves. Remarkably, 2 Japanese soldiers remained hidden until January 6, 1949, nearly 4 years after the battle had ended, finally surrendering after living underground in isolation. Despite the horrific cost, American military planners argued that the strategic value of Iwo Jima justified the losses, though this conclusion has remained controversial ever since. By the end of the war, 2,251 B-29 Superfortress bombers made emergency landings on the island. These landings are estimated to have saved the lives of approximately 24,761 airmen who would otherwise have been forced to ditch in the Pacific Ocean or attempt dangerous flights back to the Mariana Islands. The first of these emergency landings occurred on March 4, 1945, when a B-29 named Dynamite touched down while heavy fighting was still underway in the island's northern highlands. Soon after, P-51 Mustang fighters based on Iwo Jima began escorting bombing missions directly to Tokyo and other Japanese cities, drastically reducing bomber losses. The island also became a vital hub for air-sea rescue operations, enabling faster recovery of downed crews. The Battle of Iwo Jima resulted in 27 Medals of Honor, more than any other single engagement in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps. 13 of these awards were given posthumously. Reflecting on the battle, Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz famously observed, "Among the Americans who served on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." The battle proved that Japanese forces, when entrenched in prepared positions and led by determined commanders, could impose catastrophic losses even against overwhelming material superiority. Kuribayashi's defensive methods deeply influenced Allied strategic thinking. Military planners estimated that if similar tactics were employed during an invasion of the Japanese home islands, American casualties could reach the hundreds of thousands. These projections played a significant role in the decision to use atomic weapons against Hiroshima and Nagasaki rather than proceed with Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. For Japanese families, the aftermath of Iwo Jima brought little more than sorrow and uncertainty. Most of the fallen were never recovered or identified. Families received official notices of death, but no remains to bury and no graves to visit. This absence carried profound meaning in a culture shaped by Buddhist traditions that place great importance on proper burial and ancestral rites. Even decades after the war, Japanese recovery teams continued searching the island's caves and tunnels. More than 10,000 Japanese soldiers are still believed to remain buried beneath Iwo Jima's soil. In the years immediately following the war, however, the battle faded from public memory in Japan. The nation was consumed by reconstruction and by the trauma of unprecedented destruction. Strategic bombing had killed approximately 900,000 Japanese civilians, while the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki claimed an estimated 200,000 lives. Against such overwhelming national tragedy, Iwo Jima became just one catastrophe among many in a year defined by devastation. Yet, its legacy endures as a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and the terrible cost of modern war, etched permanently into the volcanic rock of a small island in the Pacific. Decades after the guns fell silent, scholars, writers, and filmmakers began reassessing the battle not from the viewpoint of the attackers, but through the experiences of those who defended the island. This shift in perspective opened a deeper understanding of the human cost endured by both sides. In 1970, Yoshi Kuribayashi, acting on behalf of Japanese families who had lost loved ones in the war, attended a luncheon in Tokyo alongside American veterans. During her address, she expressed gratitude for gestures of reconciliation and goodwill. Her words were met with prolonged applause as the audience rose to honor the moment. In the years that followed, she returned to the island for the official reunions of honor held in 1985 and again in 1995. The 1985 gathering was particularly significant. Former adversaries, now elderly men, stood together on the same ground where they had once fought as enemies. Decades of peace had softened the bitterness of war. Together, they walked across the battle-scarred terrain, stopping at positions where they had once tried to destroy one another. Japanese veterans guided American Marines through the underground tunnel networks they had once defended at great cost. In return, the Americans explained the methods they had used to locate and neutralize these fortified systems. These encounters were deeply emotional. Tears were common. Old soldiers embraced. Prayers were offered for fallen comrades on both sides. Many veterans later described these moments as a turning point, where reconciliation replaced resentment and personal healing finally began. Similar commemorative meetings continued every 5 years, gradually strengthening bonds between nations once locked in brutal conflict. Physically, the island itself has changed very little since the end of the battle in 1945. Much of the landscape remains preserved in its wartime condition. Today, it is officially referred to by its Japanese name, Iwo 2. Civilian access is tightly controlled, permitted primarily for memorial ceremonies attended by veterans and the families of those who died. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force maintains a modest naval air installation on the island. The United States Navy occasionally uses the airstrip for carrier landing exercises. Beyond these limited activities, the island functions mainly as a vast memorial. Thousands of Japanese soldiers remain entombed within sealed caves, while monuments from both nations stand quietly beside one another. With access to archival material from both Japan and the United States, modern historians have largely converged on similar assessments of the battle's significance. From a tactical standpoint, the engagement illustrated how layered defensive systems, when carefully planned and executed, could dramatically slow and damage an attacking force. General Kuribayashi's strategy was designed not to repel invasion outright, but to inflict the greatest possible casualties and extend the fighting as long as possible. As a result, an operation American planners had predicted would last less than a week became a grueling struggle of more than a month. At the strategic level, the island's role as an emergency landing site for damaged bombers and as a base for fighter escorts ultimately justified its seizure, though historians continue to debate whether the enormous human cost outweighed the military advantages gained. The battle highlighted the overwhelming industrial capacity and logistical reach of the United States, while also demonstrating the ingenuity, engineering skill, and determination of Japanese forces defending carefully prepared positions. The way the battle is remembered differs sharply between the two countries. In the United States, it occupies a central place in national memory. Joe Rosenthal's iconic photograph and the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington have ensured that every Marine learns about Iwo Jima during training. In Japan, however, public awareness remained relatively limited for decades. That changed in 2006 with the release of Letters from Iwo Jima, directed by Clint Eastwood. Filmed in Japanese and featuring a Japanese cast, the movie presented the conflict through the eyes of the defenders. The story drew heavily from General Kuribayashi's personal correspondence and the book So Sad to Fall in Battle by Kumiko Kakehashi, offering audiences a more intimate and human portrayal of the battle. The military lessons of Iwo Jima extended far beyond World War II. Tactical innovations developed during the campaign influenced armed forces for generations. Coordinated combined arms operations became standard doctrine. Greater emphasis was placed on specialized equipment designed to overcome fortified defenses. Techniques for underground combat were later applied in other conflicts, most notably during the Vietnam War, where opposing forces constructed extensive tunnel networks reminiscent of those on Iwo Jima. Today, the island stands as both a silent witness to extreme violence and a symbol of reconciliation, an enduring reminder of the cost of war and the possibility of peace forged long after the fighting ends. The fighting on Iwo Jima revealed a hard truth of modern warfare. No amount of artillery, airstrikes, or numerical advantage could replace the grim necessity of ground troops advancing face-to-face against an enemy entrenched in fortified terrain. Technology alone was not enough. Victory still demanded soldiers willing to move forward under fire, clear tunnels, and seize ground at devastating human cost. As the American invasion drew closer, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi left behind a record far more personal than military reports. Through letters sent from the island to his wife Yoshi and their children, a rare portrait emerges not of a distant commander, but of a deeply devoted husband and father confronting the certainty of his own death. He understood that survival was unlikely. Yet within that acceptance was a quiet hope that his actions might somehow shield his family and his country, even if only briefly. In one of his most revealing letters, Kuribayashi articulated the belief that gave meaning to his final days. If holding the island for just one additional day allowed Japanese children to live safely for one more sunrise, then every extra moment of resistance was justified. This idea, simple and tragic, became the emotional foundation that sustained the defenders as the battle descended into unimaginable brutality. Whether that sacrifice truly delayed danger to the Japanese mainland in any measurable way is still debated by historians. What is beyond dispute, however, is the depth of conviction behind it. The determination born from this belief carried thousands of soldiers through conditions that defy easy description. The Battle of Iwo Jima remains one of the most violent confrontations in military history. Over a span of 36 days, roughly 27,000 men were killed or severely wounded while fighting over an island barely 8 square miles in size. The conflict stands as a stark illustration of war's cost, the the physical destruction, the moral weight, and the immense courage of individuals trapped in events far beyond their choosing. It also leaves room for reflection on reconciliation, on how former enemies can, in time, come to honor one another's sacrifice. Kuribayashi, Baron Takeichi Nishi, Rear Admiral Ichimaru, and countless Japanese soldiers whose names were never recorded fought with remarkable resolve for an objective that history had already rendered unattainable. Bound by orders they could not defy, they gave their lives for a nation that would ultimately be spared not by battlefield endurance, but by Japan's unconditional surrender just 4 months later. Today, the island itself serves as a silent memorial. Its black volcanic stone is inseparable from the memory of the bloodshed that once consumed it. The underground tunnels that once sheltered exhausted defenders now hold only echoes, bones, and the weight of remembrance. The beaches where American Marines struggled through deep volcanic ash lie still, visited occasionally by veterans, historians, and researchers who come to honor those who fought and died there. General Kuribayashi's body was never recovered, but his legacy did not vanish with him. It survives in the letters he wrote, in the respect expressed by American Marines who recognized the brilliance of his defensive strategy, and in his example as a commander who endured every hardship alongside his men. Baron Nishi, an Olympic gold medalist once welcomed in Hollywood circles, met his end fighting soldiers he had previously counted as friends, an enduring symbol of how war can turn shared humanity into lethal opposition. Nearly 21,000 Japanese troops defended Iwo Jima, most perishing within the island's caves and tunnels. They fought with extraordinary courage for a homeland they would never return to, leaving behind not only a battlefield but a lasting reminder of war's tragic capacity to demand everything, even when the outcome is already decided.